Story 1. The Dollmaker's Curse. In a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there stood an antique shop that was both fascinating and unsettling. The shop's owner, Mrs. Calloway, was known for her unusual collection of dolls, each one crafted with painstaking detail. Mrs. Calloway had a certain reputation in the community. Some whispered that her dolls weren't just playthings, but vessels for spirits, trapped souls seeking to find a way into the world of the living. When Claire, a young journalist still haunted by a recent breakup, stumbled upon the shop, she was immediately drawn to a particular doll. Its eyes, though lifeless, seemed to follow her every move. The doll was unlike the others in the shop, where most dolls were simply decorative. This one seemed to possess an uncanny aura of menace. Claire hesitated, but couldn't resist the pull. She asked Mrs. Calloway about the doll, but the old woman merely shook her head and said, "That one is not for sale." Undeterred, Claire bought it anyway, convincing herself that it was just an old piece of ceramic with no real power. As the days passed, she began to notice strange things happening. Her pets acting nervously around the doll, the temperature in her apartment dropping dramatically at night, and faint whispers of her name when there was no one else around. It was the whispers that finally convinced Claire to take action. They were more than just ambient noise. They seemed deliberate, almost mocking. One night, the whispers grew louder, almost like voices singing a chant that echoed in the darkness. Claire's apartment was freezing, the air thick with an oppressive weight. She knew then that the doll was more than just an old collectible. It was a trap. Mrs. Calloway's warnings rang in her ears. The dollmaker had a dark gift, one that he used to create vessels for his malevolent creations. Claire frantically searched through old records and manuscripts, trying to find a way to cleanse the doll. Every night, she would wake up to find the doll in a different position than where she had left it. It seemed to move on its own. After weeks of sleepless nights and growing paranoia, Claire discovered an ancient ritual that promised to banish the spirit from the doll. It involved using a specific combination of herbs, chanting an old incantation, and burning a particular type of candle. With trembling hands, Claire performed the ritual, feeling the air in her apartment grow warmer, the whispers fading into silence. But she knew the danger wasn't over. The doll had already taken a piece of her sanity. Claire packed it up, carefully wrapping it in layers of cloth, and placed it back in the antique shop. As she walked away, she glanced back one last time, feeling the eyes of the doll bore into her soul. She knew that as long as it existed, there would always be a threat lingering in the shadows. Story 2. The Forgotten Heirloom. Sarah was cleaning out her grandmother's attic when she found an old chest tucked away in the darkest corner, hidden beneath moth-eaten quilts and forgotten boxes of Christmas ornaments. The chest was large and heavy, with intricate carvings that told stories of forgotten lands and ancient traditions. It wasn't locked, and when Sarah opened it, she found an assortment of old family heirlooms, yellowed photographs, a collection of trinkets from travels around the world, and tucked in the very back a small porcelain doll. The doll was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Its eyes were perfectly round and seemed to follow her every move. The face was painted with delicate detail, almost too realistic for comfort. Sarah's grandmother had never mentioned it before, and when Sarah asked about it, her mother paled and quickly changed the subject. "That doll has been in the family for generations," she said, her voice trembling. "It's better left alone." Ignoring the unease in her mother's tone, Sarah took the doll home with her. She placed it on the shelf in her bedroom, figuring it would make an interesting conversation piece, if nothing else. That night, she began having dreams, strange, vivid dreams where she was walking through a dimly lit forest, the air thick with fog. In the center of the forest stood the doll, its eyes fixed on Sarah as she approached. The whispers began then, a haunting melody that seemed to echo from the doll's porcelain lips. Sarah woke with a start, her heart pounding. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences grew more pronounced. Sarah's dog barking at nothing, the sound of footsteps when she was alone, and the feeling of being watched. The doll seemed to move around her house on its own, sometimes on the shelf, sometimes perched on a chair, its eyes always watching. Sarah started researching the doll's history and learned that it had belonged to her great-grandmother, who was known for her affinity with the occult. Her great-grandmother had been rumored to use the doll in dark rituals, binding spirits to the objects she created. Sarah's grandmother had never spoken of this history, and when Sarah tried to press her mother for details, she refused to talk about it. Desperate to free herself from the doll's curse, Sarah sought out the town historian, an elderly man who had spent his life collecting local lore and ghost stories. He listened to her tale, his eyes narrowing as he reached for a thick book on his shelf. "This is not a simple haunted object," he told her. "Your great-grandmother was known for making pacts with spirits. This doll is more than just a vessel. It's a trap." The historian explained that to break the curse, Sarah would need to find the remnants of the dark ritual used to bind the spirit to the doll. This involved a dangerous incantation, a specific combination of herbs, and a cleansing ritual under a full moon. On the night of the full moon, Sarah performed the ritual, surrounded by a circle of salt and candles. As she chanted the ancient words, she could feel the air grow colder, the pressure in the room tightening around her. The doll began to glow with an eerie light, its eyes flashing. Sarah pushed forward, ignoring the terror that clawed at her mind, repeating the words louder, her voice cracking. When she finally reached the end of the incantation, the room went silent, the air heavy with the presence that had been lurking in her home for so long. Sarah felt the weight lift from her shoulders as the doll fell to the floor, lifeless. She knew then that the curse was broken. The historian had told her that while the doll was safe now, its dark power was far from gone. There would always be others who sought to trap spirits and objects, who would use them for their dark magic.